November 1944. Behind the American lines in eastern France, two men sit facing each other across a bare table. One is an SS general, a man who, 11 years earlier, had sworn his life to Adolf Hitler and had climbed the ranks of the Nazi machine ever since. The other is the most feared American soldier in Europe, George S. Patton. And here is the strange part. Patton speaks fluent German and refuses to use a word of it. Every question goes through an interpreter, because to speak to this prisoner directly would, in Patton's mind, be beneath him. And the first thing the general sends across that table is a threat: talk, or be handed to the French. Days earlier, this same SS officer had been too proud to surrender to anyone he thought beneath his rank. So how did the man end up in that chair? And what does Patton do with a captured Nazi who looks him in the eye and swears he has nothing to be ashamed of? Not a single shot is fired in this story, and it may reveal more than any battle Patton ever won. The way it ends is stranger than the way it begins. If you want more true, properly sourced stories like this, take a second to subscribe. It genuinely helps. To understand how the prisoner ended up in that chair, you first need to know about Metz, an ancient fortress city in eastern France pressed hard against the German border, and in the autumn of 1944, the bone stuck in the throat of Patton's Third Army. Since the first days of September, the Americans had hurled themselves at the ring of old forts around the city, and in some units, casualties climbed toward 50%. This was not the Patton of the headlines, racing tanks across France. This was slow, grinding, expensive work. It was not until the 19th of November that the Third Army finally closed a ring around Metz and began clearing it, building by building. Because somewhere inside that closing ring was a very big fish, a name that meant little to the GIs picking through the rubble, but a great deal to the people who had spent the last years living under him. And on the night of the 20th of November, that man was about to make one very large mistake. The American who found him was a sergeant, Leonard O'Reilly, who before the war had operated an elevator in Brooklyn. O'Reilly was clearing a brewery the SS had abandoned only hours earlier, corner by corner, when he found a well-dressed German officer crouched in the dark. The first words out of the prisoner's mouth were not a surrender, but a demand. An officer of his rank could not possibly give himself up to a mere sergeant. O'Reilly didn't argue. The sergeant pushed the muzzle of his pistol into the German's amble stomach and thumbed back the hammer. That single, quiet click did what nothing else could. The officer who, a heartbeat earlier, had thought a sergeant beneath him went quiet and obedient and fell into line with the other prisoners being led away. His name was Anton Dunckern, and Dunckern was about to be handed to the one American who had been waiting a very long time for a man exactly like him. To understand why Patton wanted to question this prisoner personally, something the general almost never bothered to do, you have to understand what kind of officer Anton Dunckern was. Dunckern was not a frontline soldier. He had joined the SS in 1933, in the very first year of Nazi rule, when joining was a choice, not a conscription. Dunckern had risen to the rank of Major General, and by 1944, he was the senior SS and police commander for the region around Metz. That title matters. In occupied territory, the SS and police apparatus was not about holding a trench line. It was the instrument of control, of surveillance, of repression, of the regime's grip on conquered populations. Dunckern was not a man who had been swept up into the war and handed a rifle. He was, in uniform, a piece of the regime itself. And this is exactly the distinction that lived at the center of George Patton. Patton was a complicated man, and he knew exactly which Germans he hated. He had spent his career studying soldiers, and he genuinely admired the German fighting man, the discipline, the courage, the professionalism. Patton would say more than once that he held real respect for German soldiers as soldiers, but the Nazi, the political man, the apparatus man, the SS man, that was something else entirely. For that, Patton had nothing but contempt. And now, for the first time, the war had handed the general one to interrogate in person. What Patton didn't yet know was that this particular prisoner was going to look him in the eye and claim to be a man of honor, which is where the real collision began. When Dunckern was brought before him, Patton made a deliberate decision, one that tells you almost everything about how the general saw the man in front of him. Patton would not speak German. The general's German was fluent, good enough to run the entire interrogation directly. Instead, Patton insisted on working through an interpreter. He would not, he said, demean himself by speaking that language to this prisoner. Every word would go the long way around. And Patton opened with contempt, not curiosity. The general told the room that he could not lower himself to question Dunckern directly. Patton pointed out that he had, by this stage of the war, captured a great many German generals, and that this one was the first who had been false to everything. Not only a Nazi, Patton said, but untrue even to the Nazis, because the prisoner had surrendered instead of dying at his post. If Dunckern wanted to say anything, he could, but unless the prisoner talked, and talked well, Patton would simply turn him over to the French. And the French, the general added, knew how to make a man talk. Dunckern answered carefully. The prisoner explained that he had been ordered to defend a sector at Metz, and that the only reason he was still alive was that he had been unable to reach his weapons to fight back. The door had opened, Dunckern said, and a gun had been put on him. There had been no possibility of continuing the fight. Patton's reply was a single, flat sentence. He is a liar. Because to Patton, the story was an insult. A true believer, a man who had given his life to the cause in 1933, should have died fighting rather than be pulled out of a corner. And the general said so, coldly. If Dunckern had wanted to be a good Nazi, he could have died right there, and it would have been a pleasanter death than the one waiting for him now. And then the prisoner did something Patton clearly did not expect. Dunckern stopped defending how he was caught and started defending who he was.
Dunckern fell back on a single, stubborn line of defense. He was, the prisoner insisted, a prisoner of war, captured by American forces, fighting as a soldier, and entitled to be treated as one. He had not been captured by the French, and he did not intend to be handed to them. Patton wasn't interested. The general told Dunckern he would be a prisoner of the French soon enough, because they had a great many things they wanted to ask him. And when the prisoner repeated the claim, that he was an American prisoner of war and a soldier deserving a soldier's treatment, Patton cut him down with one of the hardest lines of the entire exchange. "When I am dealing with vipers," the general said, "I don't have to be troubled by foolish ideas. A viper, not an enemy officer, not a worthy opponent, vermin." And then Patton named the thing he actually despised. "You also acted as a policeman," the general told him, "a low type of police." There it was, the whole distinction laid bare. Patton was not interrogating a soldier who had fought him on the battlefield. He was interrogating an instrument of the regime, and the general wanted Dunckern to know that he knew the difference. But the prisoner would not bend. Dunckern answered that he had acted as a police officer honorably and properly, and that he had nothing to be ashamed of. Patton told him flatly that no man who was a Nazi policeman could have acted honorably, that it was a contradiction in terms. And here Dunckern said the words that hang over this entire story. The prisoner said that every single day of his life he had been honest and rightful and respectful and humane, that no one would ever be able to stand up and testify that he had done anything against the rules of humanity or human decency. Sit with that for a moment. The senior SS and police commander of an occupied region, the Apparatus in uniform, looking the enemy in the eye and claiming a clean conscience. Whether Dunckern believed it, or whether it was simply the reflex of a man who had decided long ago never to admit anything, we cannot know. But the prisoner said it without flinching. Patton gave Dunckern one last opening, asking the prisoner directly whether he had anything to say, any information, anything about the German people that might actually change the general's opinion of him. Dunckern gave him nothing, only the same line, polished smooth. No one could ever testify that he had acted against humanity. So Patton ended it. The general repeated for the record that he would not demean himself by speaking the prisoner's language. Patton said that before turning the general over to the French, he would first send Dunckern up to Army Group, to special investigators, men who could do the kinds of things Patton himself could not do. Dunckern, to the end, refused to show fear. The prisoner said he wasn't worried about being investigated. There might be some mistakes he had made. That, he allowed, was only human, but no one would find inhuman acts to charge him with. And then came Patton's last word on the matter. It was not a shout. It was almost conversational, which is what makes it land so hard. The general said he had great respect for German soldiers, that they were gallant men, but not, Patton added, for Nazis. And then the general told the guards to take the prisoner outside and have his photograph taken, and finished with a line aimed straight at Dunckern's back.
carried to him through the interpreter, just like everything else. "Those bayonets on the guards' rifles," Patton said, "are very sharp." It was a threat with no follow-through written into it, a reminder of exactly who held the power in that room, delivered by a man who wanted his prisoner to spend the walk to the door wondering. And with that, the SS general who had refused to surrender to a sergeant was marched out into the November light. You would expect a story like this to end with consequences. Patton had promised Dunckern the French. Patton had promised him investigators who could do things the general himself could not. Patton had stood the prisoner against the full weight of the victorious Allied armies and called him a viper to his face. So here is the part that is hardest to swallow. Anton Dunckern survived all of it. He was not shot. He was not destroyed by the investigators. Whatever Patton threatened in that room, the man who had joined the SS in 1933 and risen to command the apparatus of an occupied region, escaped serious punishment. Dunckern went home. He settled in Munich, and there, in the heart of the country that had built the machine he served, the former SS general became a lawyer. He lived a long, ordinary civilian life and died in Munich in 1985 at the age of 80, 40 years after that interrogation. 40 years that the men killed taking Metz never got. It is a quiet, uncomfortable ending, and it is a true one, because for all the fury in that room, for all of Patton's contempt and his sharp bayonets, the actual machinery of post-war justice was slow, overwhelmed, and inconsistent. In the years after 1945, a great many men who had served inside that apparatus slipped back into ordinary life, and Dunckern was one of them. The threats Patton hurled across that table were real, but they were not, in the end, a verdict. They were the anger of one man, a man who understood exactly what he was looking at, running straight into a system that, far too often, did not deliver what that anger demanded. So why does a short, almost forgotten interrogation deserve your time 80 years later? Because of that one decision at the very start. Patton, who could speak German perfectly well, choosing to route every word through a translator, refusing to grant this prisoner even the dignity of a direct conversation. It was petty, it was theatrical, and it was the clearest statement Patton ever made about the line he drew between a soldier and a Nazi. But the encounter also leaves us with something harder. Two men in one room, both absolutely certain they stood on the side of honor. One of them was right, one of them was lying, perhaps even to himself. And the system that was supposed to tell them apart and hold one of them to account let Dunckern walk away to practice law for 40 years. So here is the question to leave you with. When Anton Dunckern said that no one could ever testify that he had acted against humanity, was that the lie of a guilty man, or the genuine self-image of someone who had convinced himself the apparatus he served was honorable? And which of those two is more frightening? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want the next story like this one, true, sourced, and not the version you were handed, you know what to do.